In our last few videos, we've been talking about lines, equations of lines, linear functions, graphs of lines, and we've been primarily talking about lines that, if you graph them, have a slope, a positive slope or a negative slope, but they're kind of slanty. Those are what are called oblique lines. Anytime we have an equation that's linear, and remember we know it's linear because the x and the y are both to the first power, or we could have it in this form. Those are both equations of lines. They both have an x and also a y. So both of those are going to be oblique lines. Our lesson today is going to be looking at a couple of special kinds of lines, horizontal lines and vertical lines. So if we have an equation that just says y equals 5, what this is saying is that it doesn't matter what x is, it doesn't matter what our input is, our output, our y, is always going to be 5. So our equation of our line, this is our y-axis, this is our x-axis. The equation of the line, y equals 5, is a horizontal line. It's the infinitely many points that have y equal to 5. This is a function because it passes the vertical line test. So every x that you could think of maps to exactly one number. It happens to be the same number every time, but it is only one number per x. So this is a function. So I could rewrite this function as f of x equals 5. Now notice here that this line is completely flat. And remember what slope means. Slope is rise over run. It's change in y over change in x. So slope is saying how much is y changing for every incremental change in x. Well, y is not changing. As x changes, as x moves along, y is always 5. So that means if you have a horizontal line, your change in y is 0, and your change in x could be anything, the distance between any 2 points. And 0 over some number other than 0 is equal to 0. So for a horizontal line, your slope is always going to be 0. And it can be written as a function, and it's just going to be f of x equals, and notice right here where this line y equals 5 crosses, the y-axis is the point 0, 5. So that tells me 5 is the y-coordinate of the y-axis. The y-coordinate of the y-intercept. So this is f of x equals b, or y equals b. And this b is the same b that we have from y equals mx plus b. And notice that if I put my 0 in for m, I get 0 times x plus b, which of course is just y equals b. So a horizontal line is always a straight line side to side, it has slope equal to 0, and it is always of the form y equals b, and where b is the y-coordinate of our y-intercept. And it is a function. Let's look at vertical lines. A vertical line is going to be a line, and if this is my coordinate system, this is my y-axis and my x-axis. A vertical line is going to be a line that goes straight up and down. And in this case, y is a lot of different numbers, but x is always the same number. And we see here that what x is the number 3. So any vertical line is going to have the equation x equals some number. And I'm just using the letter A, or the letter A, to represent any number. And if we think about slope here, we've got our change in y over our change in x. Our change in x is 0. There is no change in x. And you can never divide by 0, so that means the slope is undefined. Slope means how much is y changing as x changes incrementally. Well, x isn't even changing incrementally, so you can't even ask the question, how much is y changing? It's important that you don't say no slope, because the slope of a horizontal line is 0, the number 0, and the slope of a vertical line is undefined. So if you say no slope, that's ambiguous to which one you mean. Notice that this line is saying regardless of what x is, x can only be 3, always. And it has infinitely many different y's that it maps to. If I use the vertical line test, I can draw a vertical line straight through this vertical line and touch it infinitely many times. So this does not pass the vertical line test, so this is not a function. It is the only linear equation that is not a function if it's a vertical line. And notice if I try to put this in y equals mx plus b form, there is no slope and there is no y-intercept. So I cannot try to put it in this form at all, and that's because it is not a function. So if I'm going to graph a horizontal line or vertical line, I'm going to recognize that it is not an oblique line. Because an oblique line has an x and a y. If I only have a y, then that tells me I know what y is. It always stays the same. It is a horizontal line. And if I have only an x, I know what x is all the time, and it is a vertical